The December wind cut through the city streets like a blade, carrying snow that had turned from picturesque to punishing in the span of an hour. Gabriel Sterling pulled his black overcoat tighter as he walked through the park, his mind still churning through the board meeting that had run 2 hours over schedule. At 38, he'd built Sterling Technologies from a startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but success had come with a price. His ex-wife had taken their daughter Emma to California 3 years ago, and he saw her only during holidays and summer breaks. His penthouse apartment was immaculate and empty. His life was full of achievements and devoid of warmth. He was taking this shortcut through Henderson Park because his driver had called in sick, and Gabriel had decided to walk the 15 blocks, home rather than wait for a car service. The Christmas lights strung through the bare trees should have been cheerful, but they only emphasized how alone he felt, how the holiday season had become just another stretch of time to endure. That's when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, sir?" Gabriel turned to find a little boy standing near a snow-covered bench, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He wore a tan jacket that was too thin for the weather, a red sweater underneath, and jeans that were worn at the knees. His brown hair was damp with melting snow, his cheeks red from cold. But it was his eyes that caught Gabriel's attention. Wide, frightened, but trying so hard to be brave. "Yes," Gabriel approached carefully, looking around for a parent. "Sir, my baby sister is freezing." The boy's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what to do." That's when Gabriel noticed the bundle the child was holding. A baby, wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket, crying weakly. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old. Her small face red and scrunched, her cries growing weaker, which Gabriel knew instinctively was a bad sign. "Where are your parents?" Gabriel asked, already pulling off his coat. "Mom left us here," the boy said, his brave facade crumbling. "She said she'd be right back, but that was a long time ago, before it got dark. I tried to keep Sarah warm, but she won't stop crying. And now she's getting quiet. And I remember Mom saying that's bad. When babies get too quiet." "You're right, that is bad." Gabriel wrapped his coat around both children, the expensive cashmere engulfing them. "What's your name?" "Timothy. Everyone calls me Tim." "Okay, Tim, I'm Gabriel. We need to get you and Sarah somewhere warm right now. Will you come with me?" Tim hesitated, and Gabriel could see the conflict in his young face. Don't talk to strangers, he'd probably been told. But his baby sister was in danger, and this stranger was offering help. "I promise I'm safe," Gabriel said gently. "I have a daughter myself, and if she were in trouble, I'd want someone to help her. Let me help you." Tim nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Okay." Gabriel scooped the baby into his arms, keeping his coat wrapped around both children. Sarah was frighteningly cold to the touch, her crying reduced to weak whimpers. Gabriel's heart pounded as he calculated distances. The nearest hospital was 10 blocks. His apartment was 6. He made a decision. "We're going to my home first to warm you both up. Then I'm calling for medical help. Is that all right, Tim?" "Yes, sir." They moved quickly through the snowy streets, Gabriel's expensive shoes slipping on ice, his suit jacket inadequate against the cold, but he barely noticed. Tim walked beside him, one hand clutching Gabriel's sleeve, the other wiping at his tears. "How long were you out there?" Gabriel asked as they walked. "I don't know." "A long time. Mom said she needed to run an errand, that she'd be back in 10 minutes. But then it started snowing harder and it got dark and she didn't come back." Tim's voice was small. "Did she forget about us?" "I don't know," Gabriel said honestly, his mind already racing with implications. What kind of mother left a baby and young child on a park bench in December? Even if she'd meant to return quickly, even if some emergency had delayed her, where was she now? "But right now we're going to focus on getting you both safe and warm." Gabriel's building doorman, Marcus, did a double-take as they entered the lobby. "Mr. Sterling? Is everything all right?" "Call Dr. Richardson. Tell him it's an emergency. I need him at my apartment immediately." "Then call the police non-emergency line and tell them I've found 2 children who were abandoned in Henderson Park." "Right away, sir." In the elevator, Gabriel looked down at the baby in his arms. Sarah had stopped crying altogether, her tiny body limp. His heart clenched with fear. He'd taken a pediatric first aid course years ago when Emma was born, but that felt like another lifetime. His apartment was warm, thank God. Gabriel went straight to the living room, laying Sarah gently on the couch while keeping her wrapped in his coat. Tim hovered anxiously nearby. "Tim, I need you to help me." "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. I need you to go into that room over there. That's my bedroom. And grab all the blankets you can find. We need to warm Sarah up slowly." While Tim ran to get blankets, Gabriel carefully unwrapped the baby. Her lips had a bluish tinge, her breathing shallow. He rubbed her tiny hands gently, trying to stimulate circulation, talking to her softly. "Come on, little one. Stay with me. You're safe now. You're going to be okay." Tim returned with an armful of blankets, and together they created a warm nest for Sarah. Gabriel turned up the thermostat, put a kettle on for hot water bottles, and pulled out his phone to time the baby's breathing and heart rate as best he could. The doorbell rang 15 minutes later. Dr. Richardson, Gabriel's personal physician, arrived with his medical bag, followed shortly by 2 police officers. While Dr. Richardson examined the baby, Gabriel sat with Tim in the kitchen, wrapping the boy's hands around a mug of hot chocolate. "You did everything right," Gabriel told him gently. "You kept your sister as warm as you could, and you asked for help. That was very brave. Is Sarah going to be okay?" "The doctor is checking her now. She's in good hands." One of the police officers, a woman named Detective Chen, pulled up a chair. "Tim, can you tell me what happened today?" Starting from the beginning, Tim's story came out in halting pieces. Their mother, Diane, was a single parent, struggling with addiction. She'd been clean for 6 months, trying hard. But recently things had gotten bad again. That afternoon, she'd told Tim they were going to the park. But once there, she'd left them on the bench, saying she'd be right back. She'd taken her purse, her phone, everything. Tim had waited, keeping Sarah warm as best he could, but hours passed. He'd been afraid to leave the bench because Mom had said to wait there. But when Sarah started crying from the cold, when she wouldn't stop, he'd known he needed to find help. "You did the right thing," Detective Chen assured him. "Do you have any other family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Tim shook his head. "Just Mom and Grandma, but she lives far away. I don't remember where." Dr. Richardson emerged from the living room. "The baby is suffering from hypothermia, but it's moderate rather than severe. I've stabilized her temperature and she's responding well. She needs to be monitored at a hospital overnight, but I believe she'll make a full recovery. It's fortunate you found them when you did." Mr. Sterling, another hour out in that cold, with those inadequate clothes. He didn't need to finish the sentence. "And Tim?" Gabriel asked, his hand unconsciously resting on the boy's shoulder. "Cold and exhausted, some mild frostbite on his fingers, but he'll be fine with rest and warmth. He's a tough kid." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. An ambulance arrived to take Sarah to the hospital for observation. Tim refused to be separated from his sister, clinging to Gabriel's hand with desperate strength. "I'll go with you," Gabriel found himself saying. "If that's all right with the officers?" Detective Chen nodded. "We'll need statements from both you and Tim. The hospital is as good a place as any. We're putting out a search for the mother. Tim, do you have a phone number for your mom?" Tim recited a number which the detective immediately radioed to her colleagues. At the hospital, Gabriel sat in the pediatric ward, while doctors examined both children more thoroughly. He'd called his assistant, Maria, explaining the situation and asking her to clear his calendar for the next day. He'd called his lawyer, getting advice on the legal implications of what he'd done and what might happen next. And he'd texted his ex-wife, telling her he might need to postpone Emma's visit this weekend, though he didn't explain why. Tim sat beside him in the waiting room, now wearing hospital scrubs that were too large for him, drowning in the warmth of Gabriel's coat, which he refused to give up. "Mr. Gabriel?" Tim's voice was small. "You can just call me Gabriel." "Gabriel, what's going to happen to us? If Mom doesn't come back, where will Sarah and I go?" Gabriel had been wondering the same thing. He knew the system, foster care, group homes, the bureaucracy that would separate siblings. If no suitable placement could be found for both, he thought of Emma, safe and loved with her mother in California. He thought of his empty apartment, his empty life. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I promise you this. I'll make sure you and Sarah stay together. Whatever it takes." Detective Chen returned with news. They'd located the mother. She'd been arrested several blocks from the park, attempting to buy drugs. She was incoherent, barely remembered leaving her children, was now being held for child endangerment and other charges. The children will need placement, Detective Chen explained. Child Services is backed up as always, especially this time of year. They're looking for a foster home that can take both kids, but she trailed off, her expression sympathetic. What if I took them? Gabriel heard himself say. Everyone turned to stare at him. You? Detective Chen looked skeptical. You're a single man with no experience with children. I have a daughter. I raised her for her first 3 years before my divorce. That's different from taking in 2 children who've just been through trauma. I'm not saying permanently, just temporarily until Child Services can do a proper assessment. They're comfortable with me. I have the space, the resources. I can hire a nanny, a child psychologist, whatever they need. Gabriel looked at Tim, who was watching this exchange, with desperate hope. They've been through enough tonight. Being separated, going to a strange place with strange people, that's more trauma. Let me help. Detective Chen sighed. I'll make the call, but I can't promise anything. This is highly irregular. It took 4 hours, countless phone calls, a home inspection by an emergency social worker, and Gabriel calling in every favor he had. But by 3 in the morning, he was driving home with 2 sleeping children in his car. Sarah was in a car seat the hospital had provided, still monitoring her closely but cleared for discharge. Tim was buckled in beside her, his hand resting protectively on his sister's carrier, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Gabriel glanced at them in the rearview mirror and wondered what he'd just done. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been a quarterly earnings report. Now he had 2 traumatized children in his care, no idea what he was doing, and a future that had suddenly become very complicated. Back at his apartment, Gabriel set up the guest room for Tim and created a makeshift nursery in his home office for Sarah. He fed the baby a bottle while Tim watched anxiously, finally relaxing when Sarah drank hungrily and her color looked better. She's going to be okay, Gabriel assured Tim again. You saved her life, you know, by asking for help when you did. I was scared, Tim admitted. I thought maybe you'd be bad. Mom always said don't talk to strangers. But Sarah was so cold, and I didn't know what else to do. You made the right choice. I know your mom taught you about stranger danger, and that's important. But knowing when to break that rule in an emergency, that's important too. You're a brave kid, Tim. After getting both children settled, Gabriel collapsed on his couch around 5 a.m., his brain too wired to sleep. What had he done? He'd essentially become a foster parent, overnight to 2 children, who'd been through horrific trauma. He had no idea how to care for an infant. It had been 8 years since Emma was a baby. He knew nothing about dealing with a traumatized 7-year-old. He had a company to run, meetings scheduled, responsibilities. But when he'd looked at Tim's desperate face in the park, when he'd felt Sarah's cold little body, something had cracked open inside him. The protective instinct he'd thought had died with his divorce had roared back to life. These children needed help. He could provide it. The choice had felt inevitable. His phone rang at 7 a.m. Maria, his assistant. Please tell me the news articles I'm seeing about you aren't real. Did you really take in 2 abandoned children last night? How is that already in the news? Someone at the hospital posted on social media. It's everywhere. You're being called a hero, a guardian angel, all sorts of things. The PR team is going crazy. They want to know how to handle this. Tell them no comment, Gabriel said tiredly. This isn't a publicity stunt. It's just, I couldn't leave them. I know. That's why I've rescheduled your entire week. You focus on those kids, I'll handle the company. Over the next few days, Gabriel got a crash course in parenting. He hired a nanny, Mrs. Chen, who'd raised 5 children of her own and handled Sarah's needs with expert ease. He met with child psychologists who helped him understand Tim's trauma and how to address it. He learned to make bottles and change diapers all over again. He learned that Tim had nightmares about being cold and needed a nightlight and someone to check on him frequently. He learned that Sarah had an impressive set of lungs when she was hungry. He also learned that Tim was whip smart, reading at a 5th grade level despite his age, that he loved science and space and had a million questions about everything, that he was fiercely protective of his baby sister and wouldn't let her out of his sight for the first 3 days. that he was still terrified his mother would come back and take them, or that Gabriel would change his mind and send them away. "I'm not going anywhere," Gabriel assured him one evening as they built a blanket fort in the living room, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her carrier nearby. "You and Sarah are safe here. For as long as you need. What about our mom?" Gabriel had gotten updates from Detective Chen. Diane was in custody, facing serious charges. She'd admitted to a year-long relapse into drug addiction, to neglecting her children, to desperate choices that had endangered their lives. She'd cried when told her children were safe, had begged to see them, but the courts had denied contact pending a full investigation. "Your mom is sick," Gabriel told Tim carefully. "Not sick with a cold or flu, but sick in her brain, with something called addiction. It makes her make bad choices even when she loves you very much. She's going to get help now, but it's going to take a long time. So we can't go home?" "Not right now. Maybe not for a long time. But Tim, I need you to understand something. None of this is your fault. Not your mom's sickness, not what happened in the park. You're a kid. Your only job is to be a kid. The adults are supposed to take care of you, and when they don't, that's not your fault." Tim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you found us. I'm glad you're not a bad stranger." 3 weeks later, Gabriel sat in family court, listening to a judge review the case. Diane had been sentenced to a rehabilitation program and would be incarcerated for at least a year. Upon release, she'd have to prove sobriety and parenting, fitness before even supervised. Visits would be allowed. In the meantime, the children needed stable placement. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, looking at Gabriel over her reading glasses, "you've been caring for these children for 3 weeks now. Child Services reports that both children are thriving in your care. Sarah's pediatrician says she's developing normally, no lasting effects from her exposure. Timothy is attending school, seeing a therapist, and by all accounts doing remarkably well. Yes, Your Honor. I'm prepared to grant you temporary foster custody, with the understanding that this is an unusual situation. You'll have monthly reviews, home visits, the works. If at any point Child Services feels the placement isn't working, they'll move the children. Do you understand?" "I do, Your Honor." "May I ask why you're doing this?" "You're a busy CEO. You have no obligation to these children." Gabriel glanced back to where Mrs. Chen sat with Sarah and Tim. The little boy gave him a tentative smile. "When I found them that night, they were scared and cold and in danger. I helped because that's what any decent person would do. But then, over these past weeks, they've become part of my life. Tim helps me understand things. I'd forgotten what it's like to be curious about everything, to believe in good things, to trust even when you've been hurt. Sarah reminds me that life is precious and fragile and worth protecting. They've given me more than I've given them. So I'm doing this because they need a home, and I need them. We've become a family even if it wasn't the traditional way." The judge smiled slightly. "Foster custody is granted. Good luck, Mr. Sterling." 6 months later, Emma came to visit from California, and Gabriel worried about how she'd react to suddenly having to share her father. But Emma, at 11, took one look at Tim and Sarah and fell completely in love. "Dad, they're perfect," she declared, holding Sarah while Tim showed her his science project. "Can they stay forever?" "That's not up to me, sweetheart." But as it turned out, maybe it was. A year after that snowy night, Diane voluntarily terminated her parental rights. She'd gotten sober, gotten help, but realized she wasn't capable of being the mother her children deserved. In a tearful meeting supervised by social workers, she told Gabriel she wanted him to adopt Tim and Sarah, to give them the stability and love she couldn't provide. "Promise me you'll tell them I love them," she asked. "That I tried. That I just wasn't strong enough. But that doesn't mean they weren't worth everything." "I promise," Gabriel said. "And I'll make sure they know who you are, where they came from. They deserve that truth." The adoption was finalized on a December afternoon, almost 2 years to the day after Gabriel had found 2 children freezing in the park. Tim, now 9, held Sarah, now 2, as the judge declared them officially Gabriel Sterling's children. That evening, Gabriel sat in his living room, no longer immaculate and empty, but cluttered with toys and books and signs of life, and watched. Tim helped Sarah build a tower of blocks while Emma video called from California to say goodnight to her siblings. His phone buzzed with messages from the office. There was always work to do, always another deal to close, another meeting to at.